The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, written in an elegant yet trembling hand. Hercule Poirot, seated at his breakfast table in his immaculate apartment on Whitehaven Mansions, regarded the envelope with curiosity before breaking the seal. The handwriting belonged to Lady Amory Street, Clare, widow of the late Sir Reginald Street. Clare, one of the more peculiar benefactors of English horticulture. Her estate, known as Greyfell Manor, had long been the subject of whispers and society gossip, not for scandal, but for its garden. The Garden of Clocks, they called it, a place where time, in a manner of speaking, had stopped. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," the letter began, "I am most dreadfully troubled. There has been an occurrence here, one that the local constabulary prefers to treat as an unfortunate accident. I, however, am convinced that it is no such thing. I beg of you to come to Greyfell and see for yourself. Someone is moving beneath the calm of our little paradise, and I am afraid it will not stop at one death." Poirot dabbed his lips with his napkin and gave a soft sigh. "An accident that is not an accident, eh, Hastings?" he murmured, though Hastings was, alas, not there. "It seems La Bonne Fortune has decided that Hercule Poirot shall once again be called to the English countryside, where the lawns are trimmed and the lies are not." By noon he had arranged his travel, suitcase neatly packed, hat perfectly brushed. The train from London carried him through a landscape that grew steadily greener and older, until the station master at Bristow-on-Tyne greeted him with the sleepy formality of a place untouched by urgency. A chauffeur awaited him, a tall, quiet man in grey livery, who spoke with the clipped precision of someone trained never to express opinion. The car wound its way through hedgerows and long lanes of yew until, at last, the estate came into view. Greyfell Manor stood at the edge of the moors like a portrait, trapped in time. Its stone facade was veiled with ivy, the windows tall and sombre, and behind it stretched acres of sculpted gardens. But it was the inner garden, walled, enclosed, and guarded by statues of cherubs that drew the eye. Within that small square of earth lay the famous Garden of Clocks. Here, Lady Street, Clare claimed, the air itself felt different, as though time had slowed, preserving the last sunlight of her late husband's life. Poirot was greeted in the vestibule by Lady Amory herself, a thin, elegant woman with a silver coiffure and an expression composed somewhere between grief and disbelief. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you have come. It has been a dreadful week." "Madame," Poirot said with a small bow, "when a lady writes to me with such distress in her penmanship, I cannot refuse. You say there has been a death?" "Yes," she said softly. "My nephew, Mr. Lawrence Devereux. He was found 3 mornings ago in the Garden of Clocks. They say he must have slipped while winding one of the great timepieces. But I know Lawrence. He was cautious to a fault, and there are inconsistencies." She led him through a long corridor lined with ancestral portraits. The air scented faintly with lavender and polish. They emerged onto a terrace overlooking the garden. At its center, among a circle of roses and stone sundials, stood a massive iron clock, ornate, towering, its face gleaming white even in the dim light. Around it were smaller clocks of all kinds, each marking a different hour. Some had stopped years ago, others ticked faintly, like hearts refusing to die. It was there, beneath the largest clock, that the young man's body had been found. Poirot observed in silence. The grass had grown uneven around the base, as though someone had disturbed it. A single glove lay folded neatly on a stone bench nearby, too deliberate to have been forgotten. A broken pocket, and a watch rested half-hidden among the petals. "You see," Lady Amory whispered, "it is not natural." Poirot crouched, fingertips brushing the grass. "Non, madame, nothing about this place is natural. Even time itself behaves strangely here. Tell me who was present on the night before the death." "There were 6 of us," she said, counting carefully. "Myself, my nephew Lawrence, my companion, Miss Vane, my gardener, Mr. Wicks, Dr. Harland, who was staying the weekend, and Mr. Julian Hartwell, a guest from London, a collector of antique timepieces. Ah, said Poirot, with a slight smile. A gathering of those who admire the order of time, and yet time has betrayed them. Lady Amory drew herself up. You believe me, then, that it was not an accident? I believe, madame, said Poirot, that where human beings are gathered, each with their little secrets and their little fears, there is no such thing as accident. It is only design hidden under the dust. As he walked back toward the house, the evening light faded, and the sound of ticking seemed to follow him, soft, uneven, like the heartbeat of something sleeping beneath the earth. He paused once and looked back at the iron clock, its hands pointing not to the present hour, but to a time long past. And Poirot, his expression unreadable, murmured, "Someone here has stopped the clock, but not for the reason they claim." The morning at Greyfell began with a soft drizzle, the kind that blurs the edges of reality and leaves even the clocks uncertain of their rhythm. Poirot, punctual as ever, appeared in the breakfast room precisely at 8 o'clock, dressed impeccably in grey. Lady Amory sat by the window, staring out at the mist that wrapped the garden like a shroud. Across from her, Miss Vane poured tea with trembling fingers, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. The room smelled faintly of toast and rain-soaked earth. Poirot inclined his head politely. A most melancholy morning, n'est-ce pas? The rain, it is like remorse, falling upon those who would rather forget. His gaze drifted to the others, entering in quiet succession. Dr. Harland, solid and red-faced. Mr. Julian Hartwell, tall, thin, and elegantly indifferent, and Mr. Wicks, the gardener, whose hands were soiled even at breakfast, though he seemed to wish they were not. Lady Amory broke the uneasy silence. "I cannot bear to think of Lawrence lying there alone that night," she said softly. "He was such a careful boy, always checking the clocks, always winding them precisely at dusk. How could he have fallen?" Poirot's spoon stilled in his cup. "Ah, but perhaps, madame, it is not he who fell. Perhaps it is time that stumbled." There was a faint rustle from Miss Vane, who looked up sharply. "Do you mean someone pushed him, Monsieur Poirot?" He smiled, but his eyes were thoughtful. "Mademoiselle, I mean only that time behaves strangely when there is guilt in the air." Poirot rose after breakfast and asked, with characteristic politeness, that each of them spare a few moments for conversation. Lady Amory, anxious but obedient, led him first to the library, where a fire burned low. The rain against the tall windows provided a slow rhythm to their exchange. "Tell me, madame," Poirot began. "This garden, it was the invention of your late husband, was it not?" She nodded. "Yes. Reginald had a fascination with clocks. He believed that if every clock in the garden was set to a different hour, one might capture all moments of time at once. Foolish, perhaps, but he adored the idea. Lawrence continued the tradition. He said it kept the memory of his uncle alive." Poirot's gaze softened. "And you, madame, you shared this fascination?" Her hands tightened around the armrest. "I humored them. Men often seek immortality through objects. We women learn to preserve it through silence." Poirot bowed his head, slightly. "A wisdom I have seen proven, madame, in many homes where tragedy has lingered too long." He paused. "And the others, your guests, how long had they been here before the death?" "Julian arrived 2 days before the accident. He and Lawrence were close friends, collectors both. Dr. Harland has been with us often, though he's more fond of my cellar than my company. As for Miss Vane, she has been my companion for 5 years. She never leaves my side." Poirot's eyes, however, caught a flicker, just a tremor, when the name Julian Hartwell was mentioned. He said nothing, only thanked her and stepped into the corridor. One by one, he met them. Dr. Harland protested that the whole affair was a ghastly business, but that he had seen no one near the garden that night. He spoke of it too quickly, as though eager to convince himself. Julian Hartwell, by contrast, was calm to the point of artistry. He admired the clocks, he said. Lawrence had been a dreamer too sentimental for the world of collectors. Poirot noted the faint scent of polish on his gloves and a small reddish stain at the wrist that was not quite rust. Miss Vane trembled when she entered. Her hands, long and elegant, clutched a handkerchief with such force that it tore slightly. She confessed she had quarrelled with Lawrence the evening before he died. It was nothing, really. He accused me of interfering with Lady Amory's affairs, of trying to control her household. He was angry, but I thought he'd forget by morning. And did he? Poirot asked softly. I never had the chance to know, she whispered. He went into the garden after dinner. I never saw him alive again. Poirot inclined his head, thanked her gently, and stepped out into the rain. He crossed the terrace toward the garden of clocks. The air was heavy with moisture, the smell of iron and soil strong beneath the roses. Each clock ticked faintly, their dissonance forming a strange harmony that seemed to mock the living. He examined the great iron clock again, circling its base. The grass, though trampled, showed a single clean footprint, small, narrow, and sharply defined. Nearby, a fragment of torn lace clung to a thorn bush. Poirot bent closer, his fingers brushing it delicately. Ah, he murmured to himself, so even in the place where time stops, vanity continues. As he turned to leave, a movement caught his eye near the tool shed. Mr. Wicks was watching him from the doorway, his expression unreadable. When their gazes met, the gardener looked away quickly, muttering something about tending the roses. Poirot noted it, filed it away, and smiled. Bon, he whispered. Every clock tells a different hour, but only one tells the truth. We shall see which it is. That night, as the rain deepened and the house grew silent, Poirot stood by his window, the faint ticking of his pocket watch in perfect rhythm with his thoughts. Someone in this house, he said softly, believes they have stopped time, but non-time has only paused until I press play. The next morning brought a fragile calm to Greyfell Manor, a deceptive peace that seemed to rest uneasily upon its walls. The rain had ceased, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet ivy and turned earth. Poirot stood by the window of his guest room, immaculate in a dark blue dressing gown, watching the mist lift from the garden below. The clocks glimmered faintly under the pale light, their mismatched faces staring up like silent witnesses to the night's memory. A knock came, 2 light taps, hesitant. Poirot turned. Entree. It was Lady Amory, her composure thinner than the shawl drawn around her shoulders. Monsieur Poirot, forgive the intrusion, but I thought perhaps you might wish to see something that was found this morning. She extended a small handkerchief-wrapped parcel. Poirot accepted it delicately, unfolding the cloth to reveal a fragment of porcelain, a shard of a watch face, the edge rimmed in gold. On its surface, faint traces of blood. Where was this found, madame? In the east corner of the garden, near the broken sundial. Mr. Wicks was pruning there when he discovered it. It doesn't match any of the clocks in the collection. Poirot held it to the light, studying the fracture line, then smiled faintly. Ah. But it matches someone's secret, perhaps. They descended together, their footsteps hushed by the thick carpet. As they entered the breakfast room, Poirot noted the subtle rearrangement of presents, the way Dr. Harland's jovial manner had curdled into defensiveness, how Miss Vane's eyes darted too quickly, and how Julian Hartwell seemed almost too calm, reading the morning paper upside down without realizing it. Poirot laid the porcelain fragment gently on the table. Messieurs et mesdames, may I ask your indulgence? A small matter, one that may help me understand how Monsieur Lawrence met his end. Hartwell's lips curved. Another relic from the garden, Poirot? Lady Amory's collection does seem to breed mysteries. Indeed, said Poirot. But this one, monsieur, perhaps belonged not to the garden, but to a person. There was a faint flicker across Miss Vane's face, quickly hidden by her teacup. Poirot continued, "You see, this porcelain bears the mark of Dupont et Fils, a very particular Parisian maker. They specialize not in great clocks, but in pocket watches of distinction. And one of our company, I believe, possesses such a one that now, perhaps, does not keep time." A silence fell. Hartwell's eyes met his briefly, measured, indifferent. "Then, Doctor," Harland cleared his throat gruffly. "Well, I've no French toys to speak of, Poirot. My old watch is as English as beef and beer." Poirot nodded amiably. "And yet, monsieur, you were in the garden that evening, yes? You said you saw no one, but the dew on your shoes spoke differently. And now this piece, found not far from where Lawrence died." Harland flushed. "Good Lord, man, are you accusing me of murder because I walk after dinner?" "Non. Only observing that men who walk often step where they should not." Poirot's gaze softened. "Forgive me. I am a man of details. Sometimes they lead nowhere. Sometimes they open a door." He let the matter rest there, deliberately unfinished, watching as unease passed among them like a faint breeze. Then, as they rose, Miss Vane paused at the doorway. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "may I speak with you privately?" He inclined his head. "Mais oui, mademoiselle." They walked to the conservatory, the air fragrant with damp orchids. Her hands twisted in her lap as she spoke. "I think you are right about Lawrence's death. But you must understand, he was not what everyone believes. He was kind, yes, but proud. He had debts, gambling debts, and Julian knew. They argued that night. I heard them through the garden wall." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "You heard words or you heard silence?" A voice raised. She said, uncertain. "Lawrence's voice. Julian never shouts." Poirot nodded slowly, studying the trembling of her hands. "And afterward, you went into the garden?" She hesitated. "Only for a moment to fetch Lady Amory's shawl. I never saw Lawrence." He watched her for a long, silent beat, then smiled gently. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have helped me more than you know." When she was gone, Poirot turned toward the window, eyes narrowing. The garden below shimmered under a thin veil of fog, each clock face gleaming faintly in the half-light. One of them, the largest, seemed to reflect a strange glint of metal near its base. Poirot frowned. A shard of something else? Or perhaps another watch? Later that afternoon, while the house slept under its uneasy calm, Poirot ventured once more into the garden of clocks. The air was still, unnaturally so. He crouched near the great iron clock, fingers brushing aside the damp leaves until they found it a small golden key, its edge marked by a faint trace of blood. He held it up, turning it between finger and thumb. "Ah," he murmured softly, "the key that winds the hours and unlocks a secret." From the terrace above, unseen eyes watched him. A curtain stirred. Poirot did not look up. He only smiled, pocketed the key, and whispered into the still air. "Patience, my friend, even in the garden where time stopped. It is beginning again." The discovery of the golden key altered something in Poirot's mind, a click as delicate and decisive as the mechanism of a watch engaging its final gear. That afternoon he kept to himself, sitting in the library with a notebook open before him. Though anyone watching would have thought him idle, his fingers traced invisible lines across the paper, while his eyes, half closed, observed the rhythm of the household, the sound of footsteps in the corridor, the pattern of laughter that came and went, even the hush that fell whenever the garden was mentioned. All of it arranged itself like the ticking of clocks, slightly out of sync. At 4 o'clock Lady Amory entered, carrying a tray of tea she insisted on serving herself, the porcelain rattling faintly against the silver. "You must think me foolish, Monsieur Poirot, but I cannot bear the servants overhearing us," she murmured. "Since Lawrence's death, I have begun to feel as though the house listens." Poirot smiled gently, accepting his cup. "A house that listens, madame, is preferable to one that lies. Tell me, was your nephew ever alone in the garden at night before?" She shook her head. "Never. He was superstitious. He said the clocks made strange sounds after midnight, that sometimes one ticked backward." Poirot's brows lifted. "Backward? How curious, and yet perhaps true. When men seek to hide their sins, time itself seems to turn against them." He set his cup down carefully. "I believe, madame, that your nephew's death was not the first disturbance in your little paradise. Someone has been tampering with the order your husband loved." She stared at him, pale. "But who would dare?" Poirot raised a hand. "We shall see. The truth, madame, like the hands of the clock, moves always toward revelation." Later, as dusk fell, he wandered once more through the mist-laden paths. The garden had grown eerily still, the last light trembling against the wet iron of the clocks. Near the sundial he stopped, crouching to examine the soil. The imprint of a heel smaller than a man's, lighter, had dried faintly in the mud. A woman's shoe, he thought. Nearby, a few drops of candle wax gleamed on the stone, the scent of lavender faintly rising. Poirot straightened slowly, eyes narrowing. "A midnight vigil," he whispered, "and perhaps a rendezvous." Behind him, a movement, soft, hesitant. Miss Vane stood at the archway, her expression strained. "I thought I saw you from the window," she said. "I couldn't sleep." "And yet, mademoiselle, it is not sleep you fear, it is memory." She flinched, her hands clasping together. "You think I had something to do with Lawrence's death?" "I think," said Poirot gently, "that you loved him, and that love, when betrayed, becomes a cruel teacher." Tears welled in her eyes. "He promised to take me away from here," she whispered. "We were to leave after the equinox. But then Mr. Hartwell came. Everything changed." Poirot inclined his head. "And you confronted him?" "Yes," she said. "Lawrence accused me of spying, of trying to separate him from his aunt's fortune. It was absurd. I only wanted," her voice broke, "I only wanted him to be free." Poirot regarded her with quiet pity. "Freedom, mademoiselle, is often a word men use to mean an escape. But from what, we must ask." He dismissed her kindly, watching as she retreated toward the house, a fragile silhouette swallowed by fog. When she was gone, he returned to the great clock and, after a moment's hesitation, slipped the golden key into a narrow groove he had discovered near its base. The mechanism stirred, groaning faintly, and the great clock's hands began to move not forward, but backward, until they stopped at 12. A small compartment beneath the face clicked open. Inside, folded neatly, was a letter. Poirot removed it carefully, shielding it from the damp air. The paper was old, but the ink fresh, written in Laurence Devereux's unmistakable hand. "To whomever finds this, if harm befalls me, know that it comes not from chance, but from betrayal. The one who covets time has stolen more than ours." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he read the final line, half smudged, yet legible. "Ask who winds the clocks when no one watches." He replaced the letter and closed the panel gently, the great clock ticking once more as though satisfied. Then, with the faintest of smiles, he murmured into the deepening twilight, "So, the garden keeps its own confession. Tomorrow we shall see whose hands are not clean of oil and guilt alike." The next morning dawned clear but cold, the kind of stillness that follows a storm, when even nature seems to be listening. Poirot rose early and descended to the garden once more, the dew sparkling on the grass like 1,000 unshed secrets. He stood before the great iron clock, the one that had hidden the letter, and regarded its face with an expression of deep contemplation. The hands had resumed their proper rhythm, yet to Poirot's eye they seemed to tremble slightly, as though aware that time itself had been tampered with. He retrieved his pocket notebook and wrote 2 words, "Covets time." Then, with deliberate care, he underlined them twice. He spent the rest of the morning inspecting the clocks, not as a collector might, but as a man reading a coded language. He noted the oil residue on certain cogs, the faint scratch marks where only one person's key might have fitted, the uneven layer of dust disturbed by a cautious hand. At noon, he joined Lady Amory and her guests for luncheon. His expression serene, but his eyes sharp beneath their calm. Conversation was strained. The death hung in the air like a scent none could name. Poirot, between sips of soup, remarked idly, "It is curious, is it not, how a man who measures time might misjudge the hour of his own death?" Lady Amory glanced up sharply. "Do you suggest Lawrence's watch was wrong, Monsieur Poirot?" "Ah, not his watch perhaps," he replied softly, "but someone else's." Hartwell gave a small laugh, the sound brittle. "Really, Poirot, your metaphors grow darker by the day. You make it sound as though the very clocks conspired against the poor boy." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not the clocks, monsieur, only the one who winds them." Dr. Harland cleared his throat, pushing his plate away. "If you're implying any of us had reason to harm the lad, you'll find yourself mistaken. I was in my room by 11 that night, reading." "Indeed," said Poirot. "And yet the maid recalls fetching you brandy at 12:30. The doctor blinked, color rising in his face. "I couldn't sleep," he muttered. "Insomnia. I often suffer from it." "Of course," Poirot said, nodding with exaggerated courtesy. "The conscience, it too, sometimes suffers from insomnia." "N'est ce pas?" Lady Amory gasped softly. Poirot rose, bowing his head apologetically. "Forgive me. I do not accuse. I merely observe. But observation, mes amis, is the first step toward truth." He left them in uneasy silence and returned to the library. There, he found Miss Vane waiting, her hands clasped tightly around a small velvet pouch. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "I cannot keep this any longer." She placed the pouch on the desk and stepped back. Inside, gleaming faintly in the light, was a gold pocket watch, the same make as the porcelain fragment found near the sundial. Its glass was cracked, and the hour hand pointed eternally to 10 minutes past 11. Poirot looked up at her. "Where did you find this, mademoiselle?" "In Mr. Hartwell's room," she said, "hidden in the drawer of his writing desk. I shouldn't have searched, but I had to know. It's Lawrence's watch, he wore it always." Poirot examined it closely, noting the faint trace of dried blood on the edge of the clasp. "You are brave, mademoiselle, and perhaps a little foolish," he said softly. "But courage is often born of the heart, not the head." She lowered her eyes. "Will you confront him?" "In time," Poirot said, pocketing the watch. "For now, I prefer to watch the watcher." That evening, as the lamps glowed and the household settled into a fragile quiet, Poirot entered the garden one last time. The air was crisp, the moon rising like a coin above the manor's roof. He stood beside the sundial, its shadow long and thin, and waited. At precisely 11, a figure appeared, moving stealthily through the gate, the silhouette of a man. Poirot remained perfectly still as the man knelt beside the great clock, producing from his coat a small vial of oil and a winding key. The key glinted in the moonlight, the twin of the one Poirot had found. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "You are very punctual, Monsieur Hartwell. You come to wind the clocks, as always, even when they no longer belong to you." Hartwell froze, then turned slowly, his face pale in the silver light. "Poirot," he breathed, "I can explain." "Non," said Poirot gently, his eyes like glass. "You can only confess." The wind stirred through the garden, carrying the soft ticking of 100 clocks, each marking the moment when silence broke and truth began. For a moment, neither man moved, the air between them taut as a drawn wire. The clocks in the garden seemed to hold their breath, their ticking subdued beneath the weight of what was about to be spoken. Poirot stepped closer, the moonlight catching the gleam of his shoes on the wet grass. "You come at the same hour, monsieur," he said quietly, "because habit is a stronger jailer than guilt. You cannot resist returning to the scene of your crime, even though every sound here accuses you." Hartwell's voice came out low, brittle. "You think I killed him?" "I didn't. I swear it. Lawrence was already dead when I found him." Poirot's brows lifted with faint irony. "Ah, you admit to finding him. That is something new. Please, enlighten me." Hartwell hesitated, his gaze darting toward the house where a single lamp still burned. "He and I quarreled that night. Over money. Yes, but more than that. He was reckless. He owed me a great deal and thought himself clever enough to cheat me. When I went to the garden, I meant only to demand what was mine. But when I arrived, he was lying there, beneath the clock. His head," he stopped, swallowing hard. "It was too late. I panicked. I thought if anyone found me there, they would think—" Poirot's voice was soft but merciless. "They would think what you knew to be true, that only a man desperate and cornered would risk entering the garden at such an hour. And yet you returned again tonight. Why?" Hartwell's hand trembled slightly. "Because of the watch. I lost it that night when I tried to lift him. I came back to find it before the police did." Poirot regarded him steadily. "How convenient that it should reappear in your own drawer, hidden by another's hand." The man stiffened. "Someone is framing me." "Perhaps," Poirot said, tilting his head. "Or perhaps, monsieur, you framed yourself the moment you believed time could be bent to your will. You coveted the hours Lawrence would never live." Hartwell's composure broke, his face drained of color. "You don't understand. He ruined me. If I'd exposed him, his aunt would have disinherited him. But I couldn't. She worshipped him. I thought to frighten him only. I never meant to kill." Poirot finished gently. "No man ever does at the beginning. But it is not the blow, monsieur, that condemns. It is the motive that precedes it." Hartwell pressed his palms to his face, shaking. "You have no proof." "On the contrary," said Poirot, his tone almost kind. "I have more proof than you imagine. There is the letter your victim wrote, foreseeing betrayal. There are the scratches on the great clock, where a hand less practiced than the gardener's tampered with the mechanism. And there is the golden key, twin to the one you now hold. You see, I too am fond of symmetry." Hartwell's eyes widened, his voice a whisper. "You searched my room. Naturellement. Order, monsieur, demands thoroughness. It is the virtue of the little grey cells." For a long moment, the only sound was the soft wind shifting through the leaves. Then Hartwell dropped to his knees beside the clock, his voice breaking. "It was an accident. He struck me first. He was drunk, furious. I pushed him back. He fell against the clock. I didn't know it would crush him. When I saw the blood, I panicked. I wound the clock. Thinking to erase the time, to hide the hour it happened." Poirot closed his eyes briefly, as though mourning not the act, but the foolishness of human nature. "And so you stopped the clock, and with it, monsieur, you stopped your own peace." Hartwell bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. "What will you do?" Poirot looked down at him, his voice calm, almost sorrowful. "Nothing, for now. The truth, like time, cannot be hurried. I shall speak with Lady Amory in the morning. You will remain where you are. Your guilt, if you stay, perhaps there is still dignity to be found in confession." He turned, walking slowly toward the house, the gravel crunching softly under his shoes. Behind him, Hartwell sank to the ground, the ticking of the clocks resuming their slow, relentless rhythm. Poirot paused at the threshold, glancing back once. "It is always the same," he murmured. Men build machines to master time, but in the end, it is time that masters them. Then he closed the door behind him, leaving the garden to its silent watchers and the sound of a man weeping in the darkness. The following morning brought no peace to Greyfell. The sunlight seemed hesitant, diffused through a veil of thin mist that clung to the windows and made every reflection uncertain. Poirot rose early, his mind already occupied with the confession of the previous night, a confession incomplete. For though Hartwell had admitted to the struggle, Poirot's instincts told him there was a missing piece, something delicate yet decisive. A single tick out of rhythm. He dressed with precision, each movement deliberate, as though dressing for battle rather than breakfast. When he entered the dining room, Lady Amory was already there, pale but composed, her cup untouched. "You were out late, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "I heard footsteps in the garden." "Ah, madame, you have ears as keen as any detective," he replied, taking his seat. "Yes, I was there, and I spoke with Monsieur Hartwell." Her eyes flickered. "Then you know?" "I know, madame, that guilt wears many faces. Some are sincere, some are convenient." He watched her reaction, the tightening of her jaw. "I must ask, what would it mean to you if the man responsible were someone close to your family?" She met his gaze. "I have already lost my nephew, Monsieur Poirot. There is no closeness left to lose." Poirot inclined his head, but his thoughts churned. When the meal ended, he requested that all present gather in the library at 11. There was unease in the air as the clock struck the hour. Hartwell entered first, his face drawn and ashen. Behind him came Dr. Harland, eyes darting nervously. Miss Vane followed, silent and tense, while Lady Amory stood near the mantelpiece like a pale statue. Poirot took his place by the window, his back to the light, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, last night the truth began to speak. But like a clock missing a gear, it still falters. We must correct it." He turned his gaze toward Hartwell. "Monsieur, you confessed to the quarrel, to the push, to the fear. But you left out one detail, the reason you were so certain no one would discover you. That confidence, monsieur, it was not panic, it was preparation." Hartwell blinked in confusion. "Preparation? I told you, I was frightened." "None," Poirot interrupted softly. "You were frightened only after the fact. Before that, you were quite deliberate. You had planned to meet him there, in the one place you believed you could control, the garden of clocks, where no hour agreed with another. You thought to confuse the time of death itself." A murmur rippled through the room. Dr. Harland shifted uneasily, his heavy hands clasping behind his back. Poirot's eyes turned to him. "But what you did not know, Monsieur Hartwell, was that someone else was there before you, someone who had another reason to fear exposure. Tell me, doctor, did you not warn Lawrence that the mixture you prescribed was dangerous if taken with wine?" Harland froze. "Good Lord, what are you implying? That you found him ill in the garden that night?" Poirot said evenly, "and mistook his collapse for drunkenness. You left him there thinking he would wake, but by morning, he was dead." Harland's mouth opened and closed helplessly, color draining from his cheeks. "That's absurd," he stammered. "I never." Poirot raised a hand. "Please, monsieur, allow me to finish. The blow to the head was real, yes, but it came after death. Monsieur Hartwell, in his panic, tried to conceal what he thought he had caused, but the true cause lay elsewhere." He turned the small gold watch in his fingers, its cracked face glinting. "This watch stopped not when it was broken, but when Lawrence's heart did. The time, 10 minutes past 11, and according to Lady Amory's maid, you, doctor, entered the house precisely 5 minutes later, with your coat damp and your hands shaking." Harland's breath came unevenly. "He begged me not to tell his aunt," he said hoarsely. "He'd mixed the tonic with brandy. It was foolishness, not malice. I thought he'd recover, but he did not," Poirot said quietly. "And so, 2 men's errors became one tragedy. One killed by neglect, the other condemned by fear. Silence filled the room, deep and heavy. Then Lady Amory whispered, "And the letter he knew he was dying?" "Oui, madame," Poirot replied softly. Lawrence knew his weakness, his debts, and perhaps the danger of his own indulgence. That was his farewell, not his accusation. Hartwell buried his face in his hands, the sound of his quiet sobs mingling with the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Poirot looked at them all. His voice measured. "There are crimes of passion, and there are crimes of time. In this house, both have played their parts. I shall inform the authorities, but with compassion, not cruelty." He bowed his head slightly. "The garden may keep its silence now. Time has spoken." The silence that followed Poirot's words seemed to stretch beyond the walls of Greyfell itself, as though even the clocks had chosen to pause in deference to what had been revealed. The heavy air carried the scent of rain-soaked roses from the open window, and somewhere, far off, a bird called once and was silent. Poirot stood motionless, his small figure outlined against the pale light, his expression unreadable. Lady Amory sank slowly into a chair, one hand to her lips. "Then my nephew's death," she whispered, "was the result of folly, two kinds of it. How terrible that mercy and deceit should look so alike." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "It is the eternal confusion, madame. We conceal to protect, yet in concealing we destroy. Even the truth, when delayed, becomes a poison." Dr. Harland had moved to the window, his back turned. His broad shoulders sagged beneath the weight of what had been spoken. "If I had called for help sooner, if I had told her everything, he might have lived," he murmured. "Non, monsieur," said Poirot gently. "Perhaps not. But you might have spared him the indignity of dying alone." Hartwell sat rigid beside the hearth, his eyes fixed on the flames that refused to burn evenly. "And what will happen now?" he asked hoarsely. "I've confessed to tampering with the scene. Will they hang me for it?" "The law, monsieur, will decide," Poirot replied softly. "But I believe it will see degrees where others see absolutes. You are guilty, yes, but not of murder. You wounded time, not life itself." He turned toward Lady Amory. "You, madame, must speak to the authorities. They will take statements. I will ensure that the facts, how shall I say, remain in their proper proportion." She nodded faintly, gratitude and sorrow mingling in her eyes. "You are very kind, Monsieur Poirot. This house will never forget what you have done." "Ah," he said with a small smile. "Houses, like clocks, do not forget. They simply wait for the right hour to speak." When he left the room, the others remained behind in uneasy silence. Poirot walked alone through the corridor, the soft echo of his steps mingling with the steady ticking that filled every corner of Greyfell. He paused once before the portrait of Sir Reginald Street. Claire, the visionary who had built the side garden of clocks. "You too, monsieur," Poirot murmured, "believed you could master time. But no man can stop its turning." Outside, the air was cool and still. The garden stretched before him, pale under the morning light. Each clock, gleaming faintly with dew, seemed to mark not the hour of the day but the memory of the night before. Poirot wandered among them, pausing before the great iron clock where it had all begun. He touched the side of the mechanism, his fingers leaving a faint print on the damp metal. "The garden, where time stopped," he said softly. "And yet, even here, truth has its own rhythm. It arrives when it must, never when we wish." Miss Vane stood at the archway, her eyes red from weeping. "You're leaving, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked quietly. "Oui, mademoiselle. My work here is done." "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "not for solving it, but for sparing her. Lady Amory would have broken if she'd known the full truth." Poirot regarded her with gentle curiosity. "And you, mademoiselle, why did you hide the watch in Hartwell's drawer?" She froze, color draining from her face. "You knew?" "From the first," he said kindly. "The lace caught on the thorn, the scent of your perfume near the sundial, it was all too delicate for chance. You sought to protect her, to give her someone else to blame." Tears welled in her eyes. "She has no one left," she whispered. "I thought if they believed it was him, she could still live with her memories." Poirot sighed. "You acted from loyalty, not malice. Yet remember, mademoiselle, when one rewinds the clock to spare pain, one also erases healing. Lady Amory must face the truth, in her own hour." She nodded silently, her grief too deep for words. Poirot took his hat, glanced once more toward the silent garden, and murmured, "It is finished." As he walked down the path toward the waiting carriage, the sound of the clocks rose behind him, faint, overlapping, imperfect, and somewhere amid their chorus, a single chime rang clear and steady, marking the one thing even tragedy could not alter: the return of order. Poirot paused, lifted his hat slightly to the morning air, and said softly. The hands moved forward once more. The carriage carried Poirot away from Greyfell along the winding country road, the morning light flashing across his immaculate shoes as he sat motionless, lost in thought. The case, though solved, left an echo that refused to fade. There was no triumph in this conclusion, only melancholy precision. The truth, he reflected, had been like a clock missing one gear, imperfectly functional, yet enough to tell the hour. As the countryside slipped past, his gaze lingered on the mist-drenched hedgerows, and he murmured to himself, "In every garden there is one clock that cannot be wound again the heart." He arrived at the small station just as the London train whistled its distant approach. Yet, as he reached for his ticket, a voice called after him. Turning, he saw Miss Vane standing on the platform, her cloak fastened tight against the wind. Her face was pale but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot, I could not let you leave without telling you something." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "I am listening, mademoiselle." She hesitated, her breath quick in the cold air. "You were right about the watch. I did place it there, but I didn't act alone. Lady Amory knew. It was she who asked me to move it, to make Hartwell seem guilty. She said it was the only way to keep suspicion from falling upon herself." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained composed. "Upon herself, mademoiselle? Why should she fear that?" Miss Vane's voice trembled. "Because Lawrence's debts were her own. He forged her signature to pay them, and when he confessed, she swore to protect him. She made Dr. Harland promise silence, promised Hartwell repayment, but when everything fell apart, she panicked. After his death, she thought the truth would destroy her husband's name, her estate, everything she valued. She asked me to do it, to hide the watch, to mislead you." Poirot's hand tightened on his cane. "And you obeyed." "I owed her everything," she whispered. "She took me in when I had no one. I thought I was saving her, but I see now I was only delaying her ruin." For a moment, Poirot was silent, the train's whistle echoing faintly across the fields. "It is curious, mademoiselle," he said softly, "how often love disguises itself as duty, and duty as deceit. You have done wrong, but you have also suffered." Miss Vane's eyes filled with tears. "Will you tell them?" "Non," said Poirot gently. "I shall not. Justice, mademoiselle, is not always the same as exposure. Lady Amory has lost all that time, can take her name, her family, her peace. Let that be punishment enough." She bowed her head, overcome by a quiet gratitude that was almost pain. Poirot placed a gloved hand upon her arm. "Go home, mademoiselle. Care for her, if she will let you. There are clocks one must not attempt to repair." The train drew near, steam curling through the station like the last breath of the past. Poirot stepped aboard, taking his seat by the window. As the platform receded, he saw Miss Vane standing motionless, her figure blurred by the drifting vapor. He watched until she disappeared from sight. Hours later, as the train sped toward London, Poirot opened his notebook. Between the lines of neat handwriting, he added a final observation. No case is truly closed when the motive is love. For love, like time, neither stops nor forgives, it merely waits. He closed the book, tucked it into his coat, and leaned back with a sigh. The countryside passed in rhythmic sequence, hedges giving way to fields, fields to towns, towns to the dark gleam of the approaching city. At Paddington, the familiar noise of London wrapped around him like an old overcoat, restless, indifferent, alive. He paused on the platform, adjusting his hat, before stepping into the waiting cab. Whitehaven Mansions, he told the driver. As the city swallowed him once more, he allowed himself a small smile. "It is finished," he said softly, though he knew it was not. Somewhere, another clock was already beginning to tick toward its next crime, and Hercule Poirot, servant of order, would be there to listen when time faltered again. That evening, back at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot sat alone in his perfectly ordered sitting room, the lamps casting a soft amber glow upon the polished surfaces. The city hummed faintly below, a steady pulse of life that contrasted sharply with the silence of Greyfell still echoing in his mind. He had returned to his routine, the tea prepared just so, the newspaper neatly folded, the slippers aligned at an exact angle to the fire. Yet even these small perfections could not disguise the faint unease that lingered beneath his calm. He found his gaze drawn to the clock on the mantelpiece. It ticked with delicate precision, each second a measured reminder that, for all man's genius, time remained incorruptible. He thought of Laurence Devereux's garden, where time had been forced to serve deceit, and of Lady Amory's pale face, when truth had touched her at last. The case was concluded, yes, but the perfection of its resolution eluded him, like a clock that kept perfect rhythm, but not the correct hour. He rose and crossed to the window. London spread before him in silver light, 1,000 lives moving unseen through the fog. Somewhere among them, he knew, others plotted and suffered, their little secrets ticking away toward revelation. He turned as a familiar knock sounded at the door. "Enter, Hastings," he called, though his friend was already stepping through with his customary briskness. "I heard you'd returned," Hastings said, removing his hat. "And I was sure you'd have something extraordinary to tell me." Poirot smiled faintly. "Extraordinary, mon ami. Perhaps only in its sadness. A man dead by accident, 2 others by guilt, and a woman by love." Hastings frowned. "Good heavens, you make it sound like a Greek tragedy." "It is one," Poirot said softly, "only with better tea." He gestured toward the armchair, and Hastings settled in, watching his friend with curiosity. "You've been quiet since you came back. Usually, you enjoy recounting every detail your little triumphs, the mistakes of others, the order you restored." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Order, yes. It is restored for now. But, Hastings, have you ever considered that every case I solve is merely a momentary correction in a universe that delights in disorder? I set one clock right while 100 others drift into error." Hastings chuckled. "You're growing philosophical, Poirot. I suppose this one affected you more than most." "Ah, but not because of death, my friend. Death is an old acquaintance. It is the waste that pains me, the waste of hearts and of truth. Lady Amory will live, but she will not forgive herself. Miss Vane will carry her loyalty as a burden, and the others, they will grow older, each day rewinding their memories to a moment they can never undo." He paused, then smiled faintly. Still, it was a good exercise for the little grey cells. Hastings laughed, though there was sympathy in his eyes. "You know, Poirot, you often speak of time as though it were a person." Poirot nodded. "Because it is, mon ami. Time is the one detective greater than I. It watches patiently, reveals quietly, and punishes inevitably. It is impartial and incorruptible. Even Hercule Poirot must bow before its logic." Hastings leaned back, half amused, half thoughtful. "Then what will you do now?" "I shall wait, Hastings. Another case will come, another clock will stop, and once more, I will listen to the ticking." He poured himself another cup of tea, the delicate aroma filling the room. There is something almost divine in the rhythm, do you not think? When men lie, time tells the truth. The mantel clock struck 9, and Poirot's gaze softened. "I have seen gardens where time stopped, and cities where it runs too fast. But here, in this moment, it is enough simply to hear it." Hastings smiled, raising his cup. "To time, then." Poirot inclined his head. "To time and to order." Outside, the fog thickened, softening the edges of the city, and from far away a bell chimed, marking another hour lost, another gained. Poirot sat quietly, his reflection caught in the window glass, small and precise against the vastness of London. He closed his eyes, and for the briefest instant, he imagined the clocks at Greyfell, ticking once more in harmony, the garden silent, the past forgiven. When he opened them again, the world had resumed its rhythm, steady and certain, as though it too had bowed to the order he cherished. The following morning dawned pale and soundless, and Poirot awoke to the faint chime of his mantel clock, marking the half-hour past 8. He sat for some time in the quiet, hands steepled beneath his chin, eyes half-closed. The garden at Greyfell lingered in his thoughts, not its mystery, but its lesson. He saw again Lady Amory's face, frozen in dignity and despair, and Miss Vane's trembling hands, clutching the truth she had dared to confess. There had been no villains there, only mortals pretending they could master consequence. He dressed with care, as was his custom, each button and fold an act of discipline against the untidiness of emotion. Then, with tea before him and sunlight creeping shyly through the blinds, he allowed himself a rare indulgence, a moment of reflection unclouded by logic. The case had not ended as others did, with triumph or revelation, but with silence. The silence of acceptance. And perhaps that, he thought, was justice of another kind. A gentle knock interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he said. It was Hastings again, holding the morning paper. "You were right, Poirot," he said gravely. "They've printed the verdict accidental death. No mention of Hartwell or the doctor. Lady Amory is leaving for the south of France. Bonne. It is as it should be. The world need not know what time already remembers." Hastings frowned slightly. "You're letting them go without consequence?" Poirot smiled faintly. "My dear Hastings, consequence does not require a prison. Each of them carries one already. Hartwell will forever live at the hour he tried to erase. Doctor, Harland will hear the ticking of guilt in every silence. And Lady Amory, she will spend her remaining years among clocks she dares not wind. Tell me, is that not punishment enough?" Hastings sighed, yet his expression softened. "You always find poetry in the melancholy, Poirot. It is not poetry, mon ami, it is order. Even in tragedy, one must restore balance." He rose and walked to the window. The city shimmered beneath a veil of morning mist, the light catching on glass and stone. "Do you know what struck me most, Hastings? Not the deceit, nor the panic, but the courage of that young woman, Miss Vane. She alone chose truth when all others chose silence. You think she'll stay with Lady Amory? Oui, out of duty, affection, perhaps remorse. But she will stay, and in her presence, Lady Amory will remember that time, no matter how it wounds, can also heal." He turned back to the room, his small figure framed by the window's glow. The garden was meant to stop time, yet it only proved that time cannot be tamed. Men try to command it, to bind it, to delay its toll, but always it moves forward, patient, inevitable. Hastings smiled. "And you, Poirot, will you ever stop chasing it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Jamais. Until the last tick, mon ami. The little grey cells must keep working." He adjusted his cuffs, his composure impeccable once more, and gestured toward the door. "Now, come." Let us walk. The air of London may not smell of roses, but it has one virtue: it belongs to the living. They descended to the street, where carriages rattled and the city stirred to its day. The sun had begun to burn through the fog, revealing a world that, for all its disorder, still held its rhythm. As they crossed the square, Hastings glanced sideways. "I sometimes wonder, Poirot, if you ever envy those who can forget." Poirot smiled. "To forget, Hastings, is to lose the pattern. And what is a detective without his pattern?" He tipped his hat toward a passing flower seller, then continued calmly, his gait measured, his gaze sharp as ever. "No, I prefer to remember. Every case, every soul, every moment. For in remembering, one gives time its meaning." A bell tolled somewhere far away, deep and resonant. Poirot paused, listening, then said softly, "You see, mon ami, even time itself keeps its appointments." And with that, they walked on two figures swallowed by the golden haze of morning, the rhythmic click of their footsteps merging with the endless ticking of a world forever turning toward its next mystery. The end.